Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown.
Hi, welcome back to Fireside Stories. I know it's been a long time, and some of you are probably no longer around, but for those of you who are and who are still interested in listening to stories, well, I say stories, really cases of the paranormal and, the mysterious and the unexplained, if you like. For those of you who are still here, I just want to let you know that I'm going to continue with Fireside Stories and I'm going to start to add content again. A lot of things have happened over the past few years. I know it's been a long, long time. I don't even know how long. Maybe 2.5 years, 3 years since I last posted any videos. But, well, here we are again. And I'm going to start this one with something that's very interesting to me. It's the whole time slip phenomena that I know is being talked about a lot lately. But it's just something I find really interesting. So I thought that I would include some fairly well-known examples of true time slip Here is a detailed narrative account of 3 well-documented and perplexing time slip cases of the modern era. These accounts are based on witness testimonies, police reports, and investigations by paranormal researchers. While the Moberly Jourdain incident is the most famous historical case, the following events occurred in the late 20th century, bringing the phenomenon into the age of cars, credit cards, and skeptical modern minds. The prevailing view of time is that it's a river flowing in one direction, constant, unyielding, and linear. We move from the past, through the present, into the future. But what happens when the river eddies? What happens when the current folds back on itself? In the annals of anomalous phenomena, there exists a specific category of encounter that differs from a ghost story. In a ghost story, the witness sees a spirit in their time, a shade haunting the present. In a time slip, however, the witness is the ghost. They are the ones who have traveled physically and sensually into a time that is not their own. Below are retellings of 3 very compelling time slip cases of the modern age. And the 2 perhaps most famous ones of these 3 are the Vanishing Hotel incident of 1979 and the Bold Street anomalies of Liverpool, which began in 1996. And you've probably heard of those if time slips are something that's interesting to you and something you've researched. So let's get started with these fascinating case files. So the first one, let's call it Case File 1. The Hotel That Wasn't There. It's set in rural France near Montélimar. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. And that happened in 1979. So in October of 1979, 2 English couples were off on a driving holiday through France en route to Spain. Len and Cynthia Gisby and Jeff and Pauline Simpson were typical tourists. They were level-headed, middle-aged, and looking for a relaxing break. They were not ghost hunters. They were looking for bed and breakfast. Simple as that. They were driving south through the Rhone Valley, and it was late in the day. The sun was setting. They were tired. They decided to stop for the night near Montélimar. Turning off the main auto route, they navigated the smaller roads looking for a place to stay. And as they drove further away from the highway, the atmosphere began to change. Now, witnesses to time slips almost universally report a phenomenon known to researchers as the Oz factor. That's the OZ factor. It is a sensation of sudden isolation, kind of a strange feeling, sort of, I don't know, I guess I would call it eerie. The ambient noise of the world, distant traffic, birdsong, the rustle of wind, fades into a heavy, suffocating silence. The air feels kind of static and electric. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but I know I have. The couples, they noticed this silence, and they also noticed the condition of the road. The tarmac gave way to an old-fashioned cobbled surface, heavy and uneven. They assumed they were simply entering a very rustic, preserved part of rural France. They saw a sign for a hotel. It was a large, old-fashioned building made of heavy stone. They parked their car and approached. The building was impressive, yet strange. There were no modern amenities visible, no telephone wires, no television aerials on the roof. The windows were odd. They had wooden shutters but no glass, merely open to the air, which was peculiar for October. They entered the lobby. It was lit not by electric bulbs, but by oil lamps and candles, casting flickering shadows against the stone walls. There was no reception desk in the modern sense, just a heavy wooden table. The people inside were equally out of place. The woman who greeted them wore a long, heavy dress and a white cap, resembling the dress of a French peasant from the turn of the century. She seemed unsurprised by their arrival, but spoke only a kind of rustic, heavy dialect of French. The couples asked for rooms. The rooms they were given were Spartan. The beds had heavy wooden frames and thick, rough linen sheets. There was no plumbing. Instead, there were ceramic basins and jugs of water. The windows, as they had noticed from outside, had no glass, only wooden shutters to block out the night air. Despite the primitive conditions, the couples were charmed. They assumed the hotel was a living history experience, or simply a very traditional establishment that had refused to modernize. The strangeness intensified the next morning. When they went down to breakfast, they encountered two men sitting in the dining area. They were wearing uniforms, capes, and tricorn-style hats. Len Gisby, curious, assumed they were local police, gendarmes, in dress uniform for a parade or festival. He remarked on their costumes, but the men did not respond. They simply drank their coffee or wine in silence. After a simple breakfast of hard bread and bitter coffee, the couples went to pay the bill. The manageress tallied up the cost for 4 people, dinner and rooms. The total came to 19 francs. Even in 1979, 19 francs was an absurdly low amount, less than the price of a round of drinks, let alone accommodation for 4. The couples assumed there was a mistake. They offered more money. The woman refused, looking confused by their offer. She took the 19 francs and nodded. Delighted by their bargain, but simply unsettled by the eerie quiet of the place, they got back into their car and drove away. As they merged back onto the main road, the heavy feeling lifted. The sounds of the 20th century returned, and the sun seemed brighter. 2 weeks later, on their return journey from Spain, the Simpsons and Gisbys decided to stay at the charming, cheap hotel again. It was the perfect way to break up the drive. They had the location marked. They remembered the turnoff. They remembered the cobbled road. They turned off the highway. They drove down the road, but the cobbles were gone. The road was tarmac. They reached the spot where the hotel should have been. It wasn't there. There was no stone building, no heavy wooden doors, no glassless windows. There was nothing but a run-down farm and open fields. Confused, they drove to the nearest town and inquired about the hotel. They described it as the hotel of the olden days. The locals looked at them blankly, confused. They checked maps. They checked local guidebooks, apparently. No such hotel existed. They asked about the uniforms the gendarmes had been wearing, and when they described the capes and hats to a local historian, the historian turned pale. That particular uniform, he explained, had not been worn by the French gendarmerie since before 1905. Now, the most frustrating aspect of the case came later. The couples had taken photographs during their trip. They had posed in front of the hotel. They had taken pictures of the gendarmes. When they had the film developed back in England, every photo from the trip came out perfectly except for the ones taken at the hotel. Those negatives were blank. It was as if the camera, a machine of the 20th century, could not record the light of the 19th century. To this day, the vanishing hotel remains one of the most credible accounts because it involved 4 independent witnesses who all experienced the same physical environment, ate the food, slept in the beds, and interacted with the staff, only to find the building completely erased from the landscape upon their return. Now, that's pretty creepy, isn't it? And I kind of wondered too with things like, I don't know, just modern conveniences that we have today, like flushing toilets and things like that, toilet paper and stuff like that, and refrigerators. Did they notice anything like that? Did they notice that those things weren't there as well? I guess they must have done. They probably just adapted, thinking that it was some kind of, period sort of deliberately set up to be a period kind of hotel, very authentic. But, yeah, anyway, be interesting to visit the area, wouldn't it? See what happens. So the next one is case file 2. And let's call it the Bold Street Anomalies. Location is Liverpool, England, and the date was 1996 and subsequent years, so a little bit closer to modern times. Now, while the French hotel incident happened in a rural, isolated setting that's like a kind of time capsule, the next case occurred in the heart of a bustling metropolis. Liverpool's Bold Street is a busy shopping district, which makes this even more fantastic. It's pedestrianized, lined with cafes and boutiques. It is also, interestingly enough, according to local researchers like Tom Sleman, the epicenter of a magnetic or temporal fault line. The most famous account comes from a former policeman named Frank. This happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon in July of 1996. Frank was off duty and he was heading to Bold Street to meet his wife. She had gone to Dylan's bookstore, a popular chain at the time, to buy a CD. Frank parked his car and walked towards the top of Bold Street. As he walked, he encountered the threshold. Later, he would describe this sensation as a sudden physical deadening. It was as if someone had turned the volume knob of the world down to 0. The roar of the city traffic faded, the chatter of the shoppers vanished, a sensation of faint nausea washed over him, and the ground felt slightly spongy beneath his feet. Frank assumed he was coming down with the flu. He kept walking, intent on reaching Dylan's bookstore. As he reached the location where Dylan's should have been, he stopped dead. The sign above the door did not say Dylan's, it said Cripps. Frank was confused. He knew Liverpool well. He knew Dylan's was there. He looked at the window display. Instead of books and CDs, the window was filled with women's handbags and shoes. But not modern ones. They were distinctly 1950s in style. Frank looked around. The confusion was now turning to panic, understandably. The street was different. The pavement, usually crowded with teenagers in jeans and tracksuits, was now populated by men in hats and Macintoshes and women in headscarves and mid-length skirts. He looked at the road. Bold Street was pedestrianized in 1996, closed to vehicles. But now Frank saw a van drive past him. It was an old box van with the word Kaplan's written on the side in an archaic font. The vehicle honked, a low, old-fashioned pop sound, at a pedestrian who had stepped into the road. Frank realized with a jolt that he was the only person not wearing a hat. He was wearing 1990s casual clothing and he felt intensely exposed. The people on the street, though, seemed to be ignoring him, or perhaps they couldn't quite see him. He felt like a ghost in a solid world. Frank stood frozen on the pavement, terrified to enter the shop that should have been Dylan's. Then he saw her. Standing in the doorway of Cripps was a young woman. She was dressed in modern clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, and she was holding a distinctly modern shopping bag. She looked as confused and terrified as Frank felt. She looked at the shop window. She looked at the sign that said Cripps. Then she looked at Frank. Their eyes locked. Two shipwreck survivors spotting each other in a vast ocean. Frank stepped towards her, and as he did so, the atmosphere snapped. It was like a bubble bursting. The dead silence was instantly shattered by the roar of 1996. The old van vanished. The men in hats dissolved. The sign above the shop flickered and was once again Dylan's. Frank grabbed the girl's arm. "Did you see that?" he gasped. The girl was shaking. "That wasn't Dylan's," she said. "It was a handbag shop. It was Cripps." Frank, being a former policeman, did not let the matter rest. He investigated the history of Bold Street. He discovered that in the late 1940s and 1950s, the building that housed Dylan's had indeed been a high-end haberdashery and handbag store called Cripps. Furthermore, the business name, Kaplan's, seen on the van, was a local Liverpool business active during that same era. Frank had not known this information beforehand. The detail of the Cripps sign was specific and historically accurate, verified only after the event. Frank's story is not unique. Years later, a shoplifter provided an unwitting testimony to the same phenomenon. In 2006, a young man fled a store in the Liverpool city centre, chased by a security guard. He ran toward Bold Street. The security guard, panting, lost sight of him as he turned the corner. The thief ran down Bold Street, looking for a place to hide, and he experienced the same sensation, that silence, the deadening of the air. And he looked back. The guard was gone. He slowed down, catching his breath, and he looked around. The cars were old. The people looked like actors from a black and white movie. He suddenly felt a deep, primal kind of fear, and he realized he wasn't just hiding from a guard. He was hiding from reality. Desperate to return to the world he knew, he ran into a newsagent's shop. He looked at the newspapers on the stand. The date on the Liverpool Echo was from 1967. Panic overtook him at that point. and he ran back out of the shop and sprinted toward the top of the street. As he ran, the bubble burst, and he emerged back into the noise and colour of 2006, straight into the arms of the waiting security guard. Now, the thief was so relieved to be back in the present that he practically surrendered, babbling to the guard that he had gone back in time. The guard thought he was on drugs, but the thief's terror was genuine. And here's another one that I also found especially interesting. And this will be Case File 3, The Impossible Airfield. The location was Drem Airfield, Scotland, and North Berwick. And the date is actually quite a long time ago. It's in 1935. While technically occurring in 1935, this account is foundational to modern time slip theory because it involves aviation and a glimpse of the future rather than the past. It suggests that time slips are not just memory playbacks of history, but actual traversals of a non-linear timeline. Now, the witness was Victor Goddard, a wing commander in the Royal Air Force, a man of high rank and impeccable sanity and respectability. Goddard was flying an open cockpit biplane from Edinburgh, Scotland, to his home base at Andover. He was flying over Drem, an abandoned airfield. Drem Airfield in 1935 was actually a ruin. It had been used in World War I but was now derelict. The hangars were falling apart, the tarmac was cracked and overtaken by weeds, and cows were grazing on the overgrown runways. And Goddard knew the landmark well. It was a symbol of decay. As he flew over it, he encountered a severe storm. The clouds were yellow and strange, and his plane was tossed violently by turbulence. He lost control, spiraling downward toward the ground. He thought he was going to crash, basically. Desperate to regain his bearings, he leveled out just a few hundred feet above the ground, coming out of the cloud bank directly over the Drem airfield. What he saw made no sense. The storm had vanished instantly. The sun was shining brightly. And below him, the Drem airfield was not a ruin, it was pristine. The hangars were new and painted. The tarmac was smooth and freshly laid. There were airplanes on the ground, 4 of them. But they were not the biplanes of 1935. They were yellow monoplanes, sleek, fast and modern. Goddard did not recognize the model. They were Miles Magisters, a plane that had not yet been manufactured in 1935, actually. Even more striking were the mechanics working on the planes. In 1935, RAF mechanics wore brown overalls. The men Goddard saw below him were wearing blue overalls. Goddard, confused but relieved to be flying level, climbed back up, re-entered the clouds, and eventually landed safely at his destination. He told his fellow officers what he had seen. They laughed at him. Blue overalls? Yellow monoplanes at Drem? Impossible. 4 years later, in 1939, war broke out again. The RAF was rapidly modernized. Drem Airfield was renovated and brought back into service. The RAF switched their training planes to the Miles Magister, painted yellow. And in a final twist of bureaucratic change, the RAF mechanics' uniform was switched from brown to blue. So Victor Goddard had not seen a ghost of the past. He had flown through a temporal storm and witnessed the airfield as it would be 4 years in the future. He had seen the reality of 1939 while flying in 1935. So, what connects these stories? When we strip away the superstition, we find a consistent set of physical symptoms reported by modern witnesses. like, for example, the Oz factor. Almost every credible account begins with a change in atmosphere. The silence is the key. Birds seem to stop singing. Traffic noise cuts out. This suggests a sensory isolation or perhaps a change in air pressure associated with the event. 2. The depression. Witnesses often report feeling physically heavy, even depressed or nauseous just before the shift. Moberly and Jourdain reported this actually in 1901, and Frank reported it in 1996. And 3. The seamless transition. There is rarely a portal or a shimmering gate. The witness simply walks and the scenery changes around them incrementally until they realize they are somewhere else. 4. The observer effect. In many cases, like the vanishing hotel, the past seems solid and interactive until the observers leave. It raises the question, does the past exist only when we observe it? And a final thought. The stories of the vanishing hotel and Bold Street are terrifying not because of monsters or demons, but because they violate our fundamental understanding of safety. We rely on the ground being solid. We rely on time being constant. If Frank could walk down the street in Liverpool and accidentally slip into 1950, it implies that the barrier between now and then is paper thin, literally. It implies that at any moment while driving on a quiet road or turning a corner to a shop, we might actually slip through a crack in the world and find ourselves strangers in a time that does not know us. As physicist Albert Einstein once wrote to the family of a deceased friend, I believe, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." So, for the couples in the French hotel and the shopper on Bold Street, the illusion didn't just persist, it broke. I hope you enjoyed these 3 true case file examples of the incredible phenomena of time slips. So stay tuned for more weird and wonderful videos about the strange and unexplained. And please feel free to share any comments or give any feedback that could help us improve the channel, or even any suggestions of stories, true life experiences and things that tie in with the paranormal that you would like to hear. And please feel free to subscribe to my channel and to help us grow and improve. So thank you so much, and see you soon. And for those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. And thank you for your support.